you. And I still remember, like, the first time we met, I was at the Catholic Bible Institute, and you helped us teach something for those future Bible study facilitator. And like, you go to so many things where you learn things, but I still remember something from that talk. You gave us a question, and you said a question that helps. Without questions, we need to break open and go deep with people and to go quickly. And the question was, tell us something that you learned before you were 6 years old. And I still use that from your talk to, like, help people break it open and like, have them think about their lives in the way of the faith. And I want to start it. Michael has some great thoughts to share with us. Before we get into that, I want to share one quote from Saint Augustine that really gives us an idea about these times, that we're just not just passive spectators of our times, because Saint Augustine, our son of our patron saint, lived also in very, very hard times with the fall of the Roman Empire and pandemic and besieged city. But he said in one of his sermons, and I quote, "Bad times, hard times, this is what people keep saying. But let us live well, and times shall be good. We are the times, such as we are, such are the times." End of quote. So we're not just passive. We make the future and the future church. So I'm looking forward to talking about what that could look like. Okay.
Oh, Dominic, it's so wonderful to be with you, and I'm honored that you could remember something that some uh, old teacher said. I think that I stole that question about what did you learn before you were age 6 from Maria Harris, a wonderful giant in the field of religious education in this country. But there's no giant quite like Augustine. And so there you are. Your quote from Augustine, I believe, says it all and sort of shapes the theme for tonight, because we are the times, right? We are the church. And so what is there to say about reflecting on these times and on this church that we love, that we know is undergoing unbelievable change, both from within in a conscious way, but also from without by virtue of a pandemic that no one anticipated, wanted, still wants. But here we are, right? So, Dominic, I was thinking I'd just share a couple of ideas that I've been having rolling around in my mind and in my heart in these past months of COVID, and see if those resonate at all with your experience or with the experience of any of our audience. And then I also have some cautions and questions for the future. But first, just some ideas that I think bring me hope. And so I'm offering those to you as well, so that we might chat about them. So they're just 3 ideas, and they're pretty simple, and perhaps they're helpful.
Fantastic.
Well, we have, since pandemic lockdown, become a church without walls. We've learned afresh what it means to be a domestic church. The last several popes have been articulate about what a domestic church means, that the home is a domestic church. But who knew that we'd have such an experiment as we have in these past months? It's a quieter church. It's more communal, and I would argue even quasi-monastic in our homes. We have to figure out certain ways to not step on each other's toes and to come up with new schedules that will allow for bandwidth and connectivity, not only with each other in the house, but with all those we need to connect with beyond. And so I think it's a hopeful time for families to ask how we could build on this church at home, to find quiet and calm, and to turn our grace before meals into a sort of more prayer than it might have been in the harried and crazy times before COVID. Can family meals be reminders of the meals that really shape our sacramental imagination as Catholics? We can't really go to Eucharist in the same way we imagined a year or more ago. And so how can this church be knit, formed, nourished uh, under the roof that we call home. So that's my first question, and my sort of a signal of hope to me. I feel like it opens up spaces for chatting. And then the second is, I think that we've caught ourselves practicing the kind of outreach that is often associated in parishes with Stephen ministry, a kind of one-on-one ministry with people in need, uh, based mostly on no agenda other than where people are at. And I find myself, even in my own neighborhood, realizing that there is a way to minister right on my block, right in my condo complex. Now, this is not easy. I see the shadow as well as the light in all of that because we're all living closer. And until the last cold spell, all those windows were open and all those sounds and smells were very much shared in ways that I wasn't that pleased with. Still, at the same time, there are opportunities somehow for outreach that is very simple, one on one. Not long ago, a couple of our neighbors dropped off homemade masks that their school age daughters had made as part of their project for their day. And it was a kind of sacramental moment of real friendship and neighborliness. So the domestic church, the outreach in a far smaller circle than we might have imagined given COVID lockdown. And then third, we've learned how to use this technology. I went kicking and screaming thinking about this technology. I knew it was important and I really knew it was the next wave. And yet I just put it off till tomorrow. And then necessity became the mother of invention. And suddenly I learned how to do this. And there are connections we are now making across miles and even time zones that allow us to rethink what the communion of saints might be across geography, if not across time. So those are three ideas that I've um, had in my morning reflection on life since COVID. Uh, what is it to be the domestic church and how can that grow? Second, what is it to do outreach far closer to home than we might have imagined? And third, uh, the power and potential of technology to knit us together long after COVID is gone seems far more potent and promising than I probably gave credit for before COVID. So, Dominic, those are my ideas.
Those are really very interesting. And wait, am I frozen? Oh, there I am. I love your ideas. And I have some questions already from our experience because
Uh-huh.
I feel like there was when COVID hit, there was the shock, and then there was this excitement about technology, and about new possibilities. But then there were a lot of challenges. So, for example, for the domestic church, um, I think many families are also experiencing their home not as a place where they see all these new possibilities, but it's a place that is lacking, right? That is lacking a proper workspace, lacking space and technology for the children to learn, and is also lacking that kind of spiritual atmosphere for prayer and worship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what can we tell them? How can we help them?
Right, right. And your question bespeaks the real challenges of social justice, right? In a church that
Mm,
has a wide array and panoply of stories, um, there are people who are in plenty of square footage with plenty of bandwidth, and then there
mm,
are people who are not. And so the occasion for practicing a quasi sacramental notion of reconciliation, those occasions have been many because we're stuck. We're on a kind of a lifeboat that isn't moving. And so I think that's a real, I mean, that's a real issue. And I'd like to hear from the audience how they're managing both the possibilities and the limits that come with domestic church.
yes. Yes, it certainly. We hear that often. We're all in the same boat, right? But some people are on a little plank and others are in a yacht.
On a yacht, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, we're opening it up for questions from the audience. Any comments, any experiences you want to share? So please put it in the Q&A or in the chat. And in the meantime, I want to share already until something comes in. Already a few good experiences that we had, and Suzette is actually a great expert on that. Gave a little talk on how to make a sacred space at home, right? Like a little corner where you feel that closeness and how to decorate that. Or in our religious ed program, we had really great experiences with getting such boxes so that we're not just having meetings on Zoom, but the families get these boxes and they have a lot of material, but they also have things that you usually not have in religious ed, that we like, a little cross or some or quasi sacramental items that you can touch and play with, and like really have an experience, and then families can experience that together and also talk about faith in their home with each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I start all of my classes by asking the students how they are, and so it's a little bit contrived, but I think it's helpful to get conversations going. So sometimes, how's your day been? Rate it 1 to 10, or how are you? Up to 3 adjectives that describe you right now. And it's been interesting. The Springtide Institute for Research on Teenagers and Young Adults claims that COVID has affected the 18 to 22-year-old population in dramatic ways, and that they are the loneliest cohort of people going through COVID. And that to me just kind of frightens me, because I think, wow, these are the young people I have the opportunity to teach. So how to make community on Zoom, it's not easy, but I do think there are some wonderful practices out there, not necessarily the ones I'm describing to you, but probably others that the audience has as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and Zoom also has us enabled, a lot to kind of see that difference. It becomes very apparent, right? Like some people, you see that there's a lot going on in the background. There's a lot of people sharing a space, and others you're like, oh, what's that in the background? Is that the ocean? So,
Right, right. No, that's correct. Right.
so
Our class distinctions shape uh, far too much of our experience, and and the gospel has a lot to say about that.
yes, and maybe, coming together at the parish or in other contexts of life and thinking that we're more equal has always been an illusion, or always be something that a lot of good people have been critically aware of and have handled with, like being very generous from the blessings they've received. Jumping to your second question about outreach, um, I totally agree. Like a lot of people have found ways to help others. At the same time, especially at the parish, we're experiencing, unfortunately, also a big loss of not being able to do outreach because it's so difficult to do that without gathering, without
Hmm.
touching, without preparing food. Like Thanksgiving dinner is coming up. It's been a big thing for the parish, and many, many hundreds of volunteers have volunteered every year and have this, cherish that experience of helping. But now very few can, just given the circumstances, even though we'll do a lot to help the homeless. But so there's also a loss of that, which is
Yeah,
just
yeah,
challenging.
right. Well, I do think you are this conversation is going toward the losses and the challenges, and let's let it. Um,
Hmm.
the loss is high touch, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Before,
the beauty of St. Monica's and other very effective parishes has everything to do with a sense of welcome that is, um, well, it's carnal. it's in your skin. You know that you've been welcomed, and we now have to do everything we can to protect ourselves from the kind of uh, look in the eye and handshake and hug that are signature experiences of community. And so I sure get the challenges of even imagining that wonderful event at St. Monica's. The Thanksgiving dinner is a signature event, a beautiful way for people of Santa Monica to feel welcomed, and for many who have many blessings as parishioners at St. Monica to experience again the vulnerability of being the host to the Christ in front of them, and how to do that in this new mode. Wow, that will be challenging, won't it? And yet, the one thing that all of this brings to mind for me is Advent hope. We're about to move into that as well, and I can't remember a time that felt more apocalyptic, more hope filled, but also full of suffering for a whole world that is somehow trying to protect itself from this virus that is ubiquitous but invisible, that is lethal, but has some limits, and we're trying to learn the limits and figure it out. And in the midst of all that, people would love to be people with each other. And so much of the best of church life has everything to do with ritualizing that. And here we are in such a challenge. So I think Advent, it has to be about a hope not yet fulfilled. And I do think people are ready for Advent. And I think they're ready for Thanksgiving as well, but I'm pretty sure we're ready for an Advent, a dreaming of a better way.
Certainly. So someone asked a question from Anonymous. How to avoid household distractions when trying to worship at home?
Yeah, right, right. Well, I'm going to ask your wisdom on that. You have the baby at home. We don't have a baby, so
I think,
we
uh,
as as older adults, Patricia and I do not have the distractions that you have. So you're probably more qualified for this question. So I'll just hint that uh, just even the bandwidth traffic has been challenging at times. We've both been on our computers, work related, and suddenly it's all not working because there's just a bit of a crash or whatever. But I think the question is asking how to stay focused and calm in the midst of surrounding chaos, which happens, right? As we're all at home and not able to compartmentalize our lives like we used to. So, what is your secret as a young dad?
yeah, so I think I'm going to pass on the wisdom from Christine Garrity because she shared with us a lot about how to work from home. She had been working from home for years on a different job, and going to worship is in some way similar to going to work. You're going to do a very specific thing. So one thing she recommended is to really to put on clothes, like get out of your pajamas and go get into your church dress, even if nobody sees it, but like it gets you in that spirit. And
Mm,
then maybe even taking a walk or prepping to be like I'm going to church, not just coming from and being in the kitchen and unloading the dishwasher and then running to mass or things like that.
yeah.
And the third thing I think is to prepare the space, so it should really be a kind of a different space. And I know that's kind of hard because in our homes nobody foresaw that our homes should be offices and schools and churches all at the same time and in the same space. But for example, when you watch it on your TV and it's in your living room, maybe, uh, clean off the coffee table, take the coffee mug off before church, and put a candle on there and a cross, like make it a sacred space.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that could really help.
Yes, right. So in some ways, and this is a hard news to share with Angelinos, a commute isn't so bad
Mm.
emotionally, right? So Christine's wisdom is get dressed, take a little walk, and then also prepare the space to know that you're not in the same space. I think that's great ideas and very helpful. So thanks.
Yeah, our previous associate pastor, Father Ian, he missed the commute, because I told him like it must be so awesome. You live in the rectory, you walk out, and you're at work, and he's like, no, I wanna, I want that 15, 20, 30 minutes to get out of work and to get into work,
Yeah,
moving and coming
yeah,
from work.
right, right. No, I'm with you on that. There is a power to that because at least it offers a chapter change in our
Mm.
lives, right? Uh, an episode change at least.
So, do you want to tell us a little more about the other? Because you also named you had three ideas as planned and three losses. I think you already shared one of the losses, that the
I
touch, the
did.
proximity. What
I
what are the others?
Yeah. So I would say that one of the challenges ahead is this how to do with the loss is high touch experiences. We've been talking about that, and the loss is obviously we had many more spaces in which to behave, and so the question that came in recently, a very good question from the audience, is right on. Like, if you go to the building called St. Monica's, you are emotionally and physically prepared for something different than you are, as you pointed out, if you've just emptied the dishwasher and moved 10 feet to what you now are going to be engaged in mass. And that's a loss. So uh, going forward, uh, perhaps post COVID, the church is going to have to figure out ways to make sure that we can celebrate in that tactile way that is part of the richness of the Catholic theological tradition of sacraments, right? But I also got to say, I've observed in this period what it must be like to be a Latin American in Bolivia, Colombia, Uruguay, in places where there have never been um, many opportunities for access to Eucharist. And so there are people who live their lives without the benefit of Eucharist more than once a year. And here we are in this lockdown, uh, attempting somehow to connect. But I do think there are connections and there are connections. And Zoom has turned out to be the kind of connection in which people can actually speak with each other in a kind of table of equality. Uh, I don't think the live stream approach is quite the same. I think it has a certain comfort that people can feel that they're connected with some event that is live streamed, but they're also passive and they're not actually accountable because we never have to appear on the screen like we do in Zoom. We don't have to unmute ourselves and turn on our camera. We can stay invisible and passive. And I think that's a loss in two senses. We have a certain Eucharistic scarcity throughout the church that far predated COVID, but which frankly is a kind of a crazy system in my own opinion as a Catholic, not as a professor, but as a Catholic, let me say. There's a certain circular logic to the scarcity of Eucharist. We can only have so many priests, and the qualifications for them is that they must be male and they must be celibate. And we don't have enough of them, but we have an enormous demand for the Eucharist itself. And COVID has taught us that, just shown us in stark ways what we already knew before. And the circular logic continues. And so the question becomes for me as a student of theology all my life, um, is the Eucharist the source and the summit of the Christian life, or is it not? And if it is, why is it so scarce? And if it isn't, we need a new narrative about how we are Catholic that doesn't so foreground the Eucharist. And then my final point, as I say, it's a caution. It's not exactly a. It's not a. It's not a woe. It's not a doomsday thing. But let's notice that lots and lots of people are finding something meaningful in live streamed experiences of worship. That is a wonderful thing, and clearly the access to that has broadened, and the response from the people of God has been deep and wide. So that's great. But live stream Eucharist encourages people to empty the dishwasher and then show back up for the gospel. Live stream Eucharist requires no real participation on the part of the lay people, the work of the people, which is the liturgy. And it requires no responses, it requires no singing, it requires no touch, it requires no connection. So I think in this liminal space we find ourselves in COVID season makes sense. We're doing the best we can. But let's just notice that the church and its wisdom and the theological knowledge base of the last 50 years has said Eucharist ought to be much more active. And we have beautiful templates for that at St. Monica's. There's no question that we could hold up St. Monica's normal Eucharistic behavior as the model par excellence for parish life. But we can't do that right now. And I'm just wondering, as an educator, what does that mean long term if we keep doing this behavior that invites only passivity and not much engagement?
It's actually a very current question to us. For example, when we look at the music, the question is coming back to us like on the live stream now, do we have more songs that are new, that are, that sound very good, or more songs to sing along, kind of assuming that even at home people might want to sing along and sing something familiar, and what
Mm-hmm.
should be the balance between the two. So it's a very, very present question to us.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a great question. And of course the challenge is how do you get the congregation to be visible to each other? That's, I think, the real challenge. Because once we gather in a building, there's no question that it is a work of the people, the liturgy, because the people are there. And they certainly are there in this other form, but we can't see each other.
Yeah. So yeah, and I really love how you make this strong differentiation between a live stream and Zoom, which has an active part where you are engaged. And yet we find that a lot of people, they have Zoom fatigue. They don't
Yeah.
they don't want to be on Zoom that much anymore, especially not long meetings, and maybe also especially not like fun or social activities. Like a lot of
Mhm.
people don't want to do the wine evening that they would otherwise have on Zoom now, or the game night. That's just
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not working for them.
Right. Right. The magic is gone. It was exciting at the beginning, right? Remember when the entire world had an imposed sabbatical? It was wonderful. And then that got old.
I find
Right?
I found that absence of driving very fascinating. Like I remember the week of the lockdown, I went out the street and I walked the dog and I walked to the corner. I live in Sherman Oaks on the corner of Van Nuys and essentially Magnolia. So Van Nuys Boulevard is a very busy street,
Big
and
place.
there
Yeah.
and there were no cars, no cars. It was eerie. It was eerie and weird. And I'm like, and it's so weird to me that we already lost this. Like it's already busy again. The highway is busy again. But looking at driving and looking kind of past COVID, what what will it be like? I wonder, will people, I mean, once we can get back in person, we will wanna, but then won't we also have these people that say like, huh, a meeting on a Wednesday evening, like, do I want to drive 45
Right,
minutes to St.
right.
Monica's? Or or do you
Hmm.
will they also need a Zoom option or a
Right.
hybrid? And what do you think?
Oh, well, those questions that you're asking in parishes, we're asking at the university as well. It's so clear that there are pluses and minuses to the Zoom that you just described, and there are pluses and minuses to the in-person gatherings that, of course, have always been a challenge to Angelenos because of traffic and just sort of the calculus in our lives for the commute, right?
Mm.
And for the parking and for the crowd. Uh, but I know we're asking those questions live at the university as well. And one of the things that I see as a plus is that I had a class this afternoon, and one student was there from Honolulu, and another was there from the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Several students were from California, West Coast time, but up and down the coast. And we were talking about reactions to the election in your particular area. And I mean, this was small talk before we got into our theology lesson. But it was wonderful insofar as the perspectives and just the fact that the time zones were announced to us, I think expanded all of our imaginations about who could be the communion of saints, who could be the communion of scholars in a class, who could be the faith sharing group. And so those possibilities are exciting. At the same time, there is a longing in all of us for the touch of a handshake and a hug. And so it'll be interesting to see what features of in person are applauded and embraced when we
Mm.
can, and what features of technology are integrated in ways that could be really helpful because, as you just pointed out, there's a natural drag of
Mm.
energy in a long work day and a long commute, and yet a deep desire in people to access programs like the one you're hosting, where we can have conversations without leaving our homes.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember years ago I talked to someone from the Diocese of Honolulu, and they said they were doing a lot of catechist training via Zoom, even like years ago, because they're on islands. You can't just fly trainers across islands, it's too expensive. But then I was thinking, like, wait, in Los Angeles, we're also like on islands, like we're separated by traffic.
Right?
Uh, but we have a bunch of questions from the audience that
Oh,
I need
good,
need to
good.
get to. Um, Nicole, do you wanna ask your question live? Can I ask you to ask to unmute
Hi,
if
Nicole.
if you want to? Otherwise, I'll just read it. Okay, I can read it. So Nicole is sharing, we have a new diaspora of parishioners who will never be coming in person, yet feel that they want to be St. Monica's parishioners. Who is a parishioner in this new world? What of the people who want to join and who will never show up on site? Are they illegitimate? Do we need to redefine who a parishioner is who lives in New York or Australia?
Wow, what a great question.
Thank you.
No, it's a
I'm so
wonderful,
sorry I
No
wasn't there.
worries.
it's a stunning question. And it goes right to that branch of theology called ecclesiology, right? Who is the church? And how does a local community embrace and sweep in the people who want to be there? But I think the deeper subplot of your question has everything to do with presence. What does it mean to be present? this COVID is teaching us that our notion of presence is expanding. It's possible to be in a house under the same roof with people in COVID and not be present to them. And I think every one of us has caught ourselves at some moment not being present to the very people we love, we claim to love, and yet somehow we're distracted either by the Zoom or the text or the latest email or something. And then there is presence that is somehow rendered because it really is voluntary, it's deliberate, it's intentional. And so, what of the kind person who lives in Ohio or Australia or New York and who zooms in or live streams in to an experience of faith sharing that is real and that is very helpful to them? I do think this will be the challenge of the future. And then, of course, there's the real business side of parishes. How will parishes be financially supported so that they can do these very wonderful offerings that not only offer the kind of sustenance in person we associate with parish life, but also these other experiences that have us connect despite distance. So I think your question is great. I have no idea how to answer it. So that's why I talked a lot. Sorry. But I do think around the question is the theological question of what constitutes the church, ecclesiology, and the spiritual question of what constitutes presence. How is one present in this new era in which we find ourselves? Presence might be more present from Australia than from Marina Del Rey, unless I put my mind to it, right? So I do think it's a great question.
It is a great question. I think there will be new forms of belonging, new forms of participation that will live on beyond COVID. And I think it was already actually a pressing matter before COVID, and we have too much of a fixation on the concept and idea of parish. I mean, parish theologically is not a biblical term, it's not a biblical concept, it's not that important, it's a very and but we have an idea of parish that is so important to us, and not even in a way that really makes so much sense. I mean, I've worked with a lot of parishes in the archdiocese, and some are really, very small to a degree that is very difficult to sustain. And at some point in the future, you might have to go the route that other dioceses are going. My home diocese of Freiburg in Germany, they are merging parishes at a gigantic scale, and they really are looking at maybe forming centers of spirituality where you have smaller satellites that just have like a basic service, a mass once in a while, but then you have centers where you can have activities and technology and staffing and all these things. Well, in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, so far we're really holding on to have as many parishes as possible, like as we had, as grew over the years, and people are really attached to them, right? There's a lot of emotional capital, but with the consequence that a lot of them have no staffing and a priest who's like a very lone warrior.
So I would just say that if you look at parish life in the last 40 years in the United States, including in LA, you do see already shifts that might be promises of future shifts that you're describing in Freiburg. And that's to say that once upon a time when I was a college-age student, my parents moved from one place to another about 5 miles from their first place. And they were riddled with guilt about which parish they belonged to and which envelopes they should use. And so they were double enveloping Catholics for a while until they finally decided on which parish they would go to. That seems like a quaint story in light of all the people that we know who have been streaming into a place like St. Monica's and finding in a place like that deep meaning, and knowing that this is not within their zip code, right? So that shift has already taken place. People are choosing their parishes based not on where they live geographically, which was the original conception at the establishment of the church in the United States, at least by the hierarchy.
Yeah, and
And I mean, that's kind of over, right? It's quaint.
And it's been going on for a while.
For a
Many
long time.
parishes at St. Monica's at a large scale. We already had people, from Ventura, and we have one person from Riverside asking us if she could join our CA.
Yeah, yeah.
We have another question from Timothy. Tim is asking, how will the sacraments be celebrated after COVID-19? So I guess this question is also getting at, will it be different than before COVID-19?
Yeah, right.
And it might also hint at, that this whole thing. I mean, we told people for decades or centuries, you need to have the Eucharist, and now suddenly it's suspended. Like, how do you go back from that?
Right, right. Well, I think Timothy's question is provocative because we have, at least since the Reformation, determined our Catholic identity over against the Protestant reformers with a robust notion of the sacramental life as making us somehow different, and frankly, for many centuries until Vatican II, better than the Protestant reformers. So sacrament has been a kind of watchword for us, and the sacramental life has been a kind of point of distinction. How will we go forward from here? I think COVID has simply illustrated to us what many, many other Catholics throughout the globe have experienced all the time, and that is non-access to the sacraments. So going forward, it will be interesting to see to what extent our sacramental celebrations are deeply communally based in either parishes or centers for spirituality or whatever is to come into the future. To what extent will they be there? And to what extent will we put into the hands of people more resources, the creative resources you mentioned, Dominic, that Suzette has enlisted and given to people. They're but one example, but how would people into the future begin to understand that breaking bread and pouring wine at the family table is not a canonical Eucharist, but it's something approaching it. It's something that helps us to remember that which we cannot have canonically. So I'm not sure how the sacraments will be after COVID, but right now we're in COVID, and we have in this liminal space an opportunity to at least think through the depth of the question that Timothy posed. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think, and as you said, it's the sacramental focus was also sometimes detrimental, right? Because we thought, well, we were tempted to think it's the beginning and the end of discipleship, right? And there was already a shift of saying, sacraments are very important, but the journey of discipleship, and the Pope puts that really out with saying, we need to do the missionary option. Everything in our parishes, our culture, our resources need to be focused on mission. It gives us a new priority. And then what is mission, right? Making disciples. But what is a disciple? What is a mature disciple? If we thought it's just the sacraments and you graduate with confirmation, then we're never going to get to the heart of forming people that are transformed, that are praying, that have a relationship with Jesus, that serve the poor.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're right. And then there's the invitation. I mean, what phone doesn't have an app with the USCCB readings for each day on it? So we can become a people of scripture in our homes by reflecting each day on the readings. I find this a really helpful resource to the start of my day, to simply read the readings and reflect on them. And I've got to say, I probably spend more time with them than I would if I were attending a Eucharist. If I were at morning Mass, I might let them fly by. but now they're on my phone, and I am sipping coffee as I read them, but I'm trying to do it in a prayerful space. And I think there are a lot of people far more spiritually awake than me who are doing that mightily. And so this may be the invitation, Timothy, to not only a sacramental church, but a word-based church, which we also are, for the discipleship that Dominic, you're describing.
Yeah, that really leads us to another question from Barbara. She's writing, the role of the laity surely changes since we're not physically present. It is important that laity not be discounted. How should the church include the laity in ministries and evangelization?
Right. Well, I do think the Stephen ministry is the ministry of COVID. So no matter where we live, there are neighbors, and no matter what their religious or spiritual identity, they're in need. And so the one-on-one kindness that is not normally easy to carry off in Los Angeles has become easier by virtue of the fact of what Dominic said. You know, there are fewer cars on Venice Boulevard. My goodness, wow. There's a phenomenon, right? But it's an invitation to a quiet and a depth that we haven't normally had in our busyness. And so I don't know what will happen with ministries when we emerge back into the structures that we know in parish. But in the meantime, we all live somewhere and somebody lives next door. So I do think that kind of lay ministry will thrive in COVID. I'm always sad that the institutional church has not taken more opportunity to seize the invitation of the Spirit with respect to lay ministries and ministry leadership in parishes and churches. St. Monica's might be a nice exception to that rule, but it continues to be a halting place, and I don't understand how that will work into the future. I can't even imagine, but I just witnessed the Amazon conversation about whether or not we could ordain some married men who've been struggling mightily to lead a church in a terrible, difficult environment. So I think we've got a lot of work to do on that. And I think far too often we don't get to Barbara's question, and we always seem to have an excuse. It's COVID, or before that, it's the new cathedral, or somewhere in the middle, it was the clergy sex abuse scandal and payouts to victims that to try to do retribution. There's always a reason that we're not going to do some serious systemic change to elevate lay ministers in the Catholic Church. So I doubt I'll live long enough to see the happy resolution to Barbara's question. But Dominic, if you keep eating right, maybe you'll live long enough.
Maybe. I mean, there are some models, right? In some parishes in the archdiocese, there are parish life directors, and who lead the parish as a pastor, you know, in every regard except for sacraments and preaching. But this has been very successful. Holy Family in Pasadena, for example, or
Yes,
Blessed
yes.
Sacrament in Hollywood. But it's a model that wasn't, like, in the last 5 years, there weren't any added to that, you know. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And of course, your own native Germany has much to teach us about that. I mean, that's just you've got a lot going on there, sir.
yeah, and certainly, like, for example, at St. Monica's, I love there's a lot of collaboration between lay staff and the priest. There's a lot of collaboration between the parish council and the leadership. But for me as a German, that's still very deficient. Like, in where I come from in Germany, the parish council is not just appointed; it's voted on, and you like run and you're voted on, and it doesn't just counsel; it actually uh, uh, takes decisions on matters
Right.
that are
Right.
binding, with the pastor being able to veto them. But still, I mean, it's very meaningful.
Hmm. But that's why we're so happy we have you, Dominic. You can press us toward the future, and you should be happy because
I-
so many missionaries in the past have had to suffer by being placed in very difficult situations. You find yourself 7 blocks from the Pacific Ocean among a great community. I think you did all right. You landed, man. You landed.
Thank you. Yes, and yeah, and I can talk about things that are otherwhere, that are somewhere else in the world that we can't have them. So,
That's right. That's right. So
so
too many of us live west of the 405 and don't listen to anybody else. So
yeah.
we're glad to have you.
Well, I live east of the 405, just by half a mile, though.
By half a mile. Van Nuys.
Yeah, sure. So Nicole is asking another question. She's asking, what can we learn from the Jewish diaspora that has been going on for over 2,000 years? They built their domestic church in a way after the temple were destroyed, and with them the authority and the centering rabbis.
Oh, Nicole, you are smart. And I hope you come to LMU, or maybe you are already there, because that's a great question. So Judaism of its nature is so much more comfortable being a domestic church than Christianity is, and certainly than Catholic Christianity is. So Judaism has already lost its worship center, as you know. Your question is framed perfectly. So you have originally First Temple Judaism established by David and Solomon, and that temple is destroyed. It's sacked by the Babylonians in 587, and off go all of the intellectuals and kind of visionaries, the poets and the artists. They leave Jerusalem and they must go to Babylon. And when they come back, so begins the second temple building, the one that Jesus worships in. And that temple is destroyed in 70 by the Roman government quelling an uprising. And there is no third temple, just a Western Wall and a sense of hope that at some point that part of ritual life could be rebuilt. And so here we are, right? In a long, beautiful Jewish history, recognizing that there is the religion from which we come as Christians. This religion from which we come says, gather at the dining room table, tell the story of Passover, have the Seder, come every Friday night and light the candles and recognize Dayenu, that will be enough, that we gathered to give praise for Shabbat, that we took Saturday or Sunday, whichever is your day, and we made it really holy by the fact that we connected with the people that we love and that we did something special that reminded us that we were more than machines and makers of jobs and website webmasters. We were more than that. And so I think in post Temple Judaism, we do have a ready, fecund model for how it would be possible for Christian families to try to keep alive that which is most important. And in a sense, to redefine, I don't want to say redefine, to catch a whiff of Eucharist at their own tables and hope for a day when we can gather for the canonical Eucharist together under one roof, the kinds of Eucharists that certainly have moved hearts for a long time at a place like St. Monica Catholic Church at California Avenue. So I think your question's terrific. I think it's full of possibilities for rethinking who we might have to be into the future. And certainly, as the great Karl Rahner, perhaps the true north theologian of Vatican II, said, the Christian of the 21st century will be a mystic, or she will not be a Christian at all. And so, how do we take the mystical tradition of our great Christian tradition and fuse it with what you're drawing upon, that Judaism itself is a home-based religion? There are certainly synagogues and there are temples, but
I just wanted
it's a
to say,
home-based religion.
even Judaism went later, and they built synagogues and started all of that journey.
Yeah. So they certainly found ways to come together as a community, but something happened that made the home far more important than it might have been prior.
And I think, and I think also these small pieces of daily spirituality and their importance is much more prominent in Judaism. That when you leave your house or you come back, that you pray. And even if it's just the little prayer capsule that they put on the and these things, right, or the prayer at the table. And also the importance of the resting day, the Sabbath, or for us the Sunday, right? I think especially in America, we should probably learn from that and be like, there should really be a day of rest where we don't work. And also, not in ministries, we sometimes think like, ministry is not work, so you can do it 7 days a week, but like for everything needs to be a rest. And your devices, take some rest from your devices.
Well, the devices are a long arm of yanking us away from Shabbat, right? That's the problem. How to take Sabbath? The only way is to turn off your phone and put it under your couch pillow, right? Because it just seems to go on and on. But I do think what you're saying is absolutely right. Where are the gathering places into the future, even as we figure out how home base can be what it can be?
Well, very, very. Thank you very much for the conversation. We're at the end of our time. Any last thoughts?
Oh, I just, chatting with you gives me hope. I know the kind of good work you're doing as a lay pastoral minister at a great church, and it certainly gives me hope for a vision of the church and for lay ministry that I have and have tended for years. Suzette, I had the chance to learn with her and from her in some graduate studies. She continues to enrich our program at LMU by her membership on our advisory board. I know Merrick only casually, but with great admiration. I know about your work that is tended to building a church without walls at a point in COVID where we must do that. So I feel honored to be with you and to be the distant fourth evangelist of a great parish. So thank you for the invitation to be with you and to share some thoughts. And thank you to the audience. Wow, fabulous questions. I wish we could gather some other way than virtually, but someday soon, right? Next year in Jerusalem.
Thank you. It was an honor and pleasure talking to you and having this conversation. Okay, Suzette.
Thank you
so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael. What a treat.
You guys are wonderful. So keep doing your good work. Big hugs to the rest of the staff and to Monsignor Lloyd. And here we are on the edge of Thanksgiving and into Advent hope. Probably a good place to be right now, given our world. So thank you so much for this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night now. Blessings.
Blessings to you as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.